Location, location, location. Stuff models are everywhere in pitching analysis. They're trying to estimate a pitch's success by looking at its components and comparing those components to past pitches with similar traits. But location is another very obvious component of pitching that I don't think is tracked as much on a multi-start basis, and it often drives bouts of success with pitchers. Location adjustments can be layered or very simple, and there's two in particular this year I want to talk about. Let's start with Cole Ragans. In his first 7 starts this season, this is where he located his cutter to right-handed hitters. As you could probably guess, this wasn't ideal. A lot of red concentration over the middle of the plate, which is pitch frequency, and that middle of the plate portion is where hitters do their most damage. It was the only pitch in his mix that allowed an expected slug over 400. In 2023, his location was more concentrated toward the inner third of the plate, and the pitch performed better. So jump forward to May 2024, after his cutter was having these issues, he cut the usage of the pitch from 20% down to 5%. In the short term, things were fine. I often think hitters take 3 to 4 starts to believe a usage change a pitcher has shown. In the long term, however, he now had nothing he was comfortable locating on the inner third of the plate with less than 2 strikes to righties. His curveball could get there, but this pitch is almost purely an 0-0 strike stealer for him. When he needed to get back into a count, say 1-0 or 2-1, this cutter was an essential tool for him. Ragans knew he needed to get his cutter back.
Yeah, so I've toyed around with a couple different grips this year. I was staying arm side, like you said, a lot, and when a cutter stays arm side, it's middle away to a righty, and it gets absolutely hammered. So, just toyed with a grip, trying to get more consistent movement where I, a little more comfortable with it, and, just take it down a notch, use my fastball a little more, stuff like that. Kind of hurt me there for a few times, just trying to make sure it's consistently getting to my glove side and getting where I want it to go.
Now as we jump to the middle of June, we see that 5% usage from May is no longer. His usage is back up to 15%. The expected slug on the pitch is back below 400. And would you look at that, his location changed. Gone are the days of that pitch missing arm side, as Reagan says. It now looks a lot more like 2023, and he once again has something that he can work back into counts with against right-handed hitters. Reagan's cutter illustrates an interesting point in regards to location. The grip of the pitch and the resulting shape of that offering can have influence on where it ends up in the strike zone. I think a lot of the time we only think of location as I'm going to move the pitch that's on this side of the plate all the way to the other side of the plate. Dramatic location changes. And we do have an example of that we'll get to in a bit. But in the case of Reagan's cutter, things are much more layered. He identified an issue, he dropped the usage of the pitch, he changed the grip, then he reignited the usage of that pitch, and you saw a difference in location. All of those variables went into him fixing the ultimate location of the pitch, which was really the primary issue of the offering. But there's one other element of Reagan's cutter I want to talk about. You may have been wondering to yourself, why exactly did his location revert back to those arm side middle misses that we saw in April 2024? My best guess is a fun one. He moved his location on the rubber. In 2023, Reagan set up on the third base side of the rubber. Early in 2024, we saw Reagan shift towards the middle of the rubber. This moved his horizontal release point by almost a whole foot. That rubber move coincided with his poor cutter. Coincidence? Probably not. The great Alex Chamberlain had a piece a while back on Fangraphs about a topic known as horizontal approach angle. While that topic can be nuanced and often tough to find signal in, there was one line in his piece that pointed out how moving on the rubber can actually augment the performance or location of a pitch without actually changing a pitcher's mechanics. It's basically a much less risky way to play with the locations and visuals of a pitch. Although Reagan started towards the middle of the rubber, which was a deviation from 2023, he actually went back to his third base side by early May, right before he changed his cutter grip. In the same way that multiple factors can influence stuff like velocity, shape, release, etc., there are multiple components that go into location. And Reagan's cutter is a really good example of that. But let's talk about the more literal location change, taking a pitch and moving it to the complete opposite side of the plate and seeing how it performs. Since the beginning of 2023, Mitch Keller has had an issue with left-handed hitters. It's a pretty natural situation for a pitcher with good breaking balls to have. You want things moving away from a hitter to generate swing and miss. Keller was great at creating movement this way, which moves away from a righty, but unfortunately into a lefty. He had a 5+ ERA in the month of April this year and was allowing a near 500 slug to lefties. So he took his fastball, which was mostly located up away from left-handed hitters, and started throwing it inside to lefties. Since that adjustment, his swing miss has jumped from 18% to 25%, which is a respectable increase. And although his expected slug only fell from about 450 to 420, which in a relatively small sample doesn't really say a ton, I think you could call this fastball adjustment at least part of the reason for his improvement. This location change is much simpler than Ragans. Keller's doing a more dramatic flip, as we saw. The thing to consider with Keller's change is how his primary pitch moving affects how the other pitches work in his mix. Most notably his cutter, which is now placed on average in the exact same location as his four-seam fastball. And it's not doing that great. It has a near 700 expected slug since he moved his fastball location to the inner third. Maybe it has to do with the idea that two pitches at different velocities in the same spot is allowing the hitter to catch up to the slower pitch. But you can also just look and see that some of the damage he's allowed is just a byproduct of arm side misses on his cutter back into the heart of the zone. I think this adjustment for Keller is good in theory. I like pitching more inside to the opposite handedness of hitter. I just wonder whether he's one more trick away from this really paying off. Maybe he adds some kind of splitter or perhaps more precise slider location, something to take advantage of how much more hitters have to respect the inner third of the plate. Location changes come in all shapes and sizes. With Cole Ragans, things were very layered in terms of why the location even changed in the first place and how he had to get it back to being that up-in pitch that helped him dominate behind in the count to right-handed hitters. With Mitch Keller, things were pretty obvious. He was not good versus lefties. He needed to come up with a better plan, so just move one pitch's location entirely and see how it affects the rest of your repertoire. This is something I track a lot in my Substack, which I'm going to link to in the show notes below here. I talk about this a lot. I just think it's a fundamental way to understand how pitchers are changing, especially on a matchup basis when you're watching an individual game. Things like stuff are really fun to track, but they stabilize so quickly, I think, that there's not entirely a lot of opportunity to be confident in changes in that over time. I look at usage a lot too. I will look at shape changes as well. I just find that shape changes are a bit rare to come across. You know, adding a new pitch, changing an individual shape of the pitch are all cool, and I love talking about them, but location is something that you could look at a lot, and I think it has a huge influence on how pitchers perform throughout the course of a very long season, especially as you ramp up into postseason where things are a lot more variable and nuanced and you're looking at extremely small samples on how to approach hitters. If a pitcher has the ability to go to multiple spots with the pitch historically, I think it makes the advanced prep for that team a bit more difficult. Location is fun. I like looking at it. Even if there's some noise a lot of the time, you got to look at 2 to 3 starts. But I hope you learned something in this video. Cole Ragans is a really good guy. I appreciated him taking the time at the All-Star break, All-Star media availability. Didn't get a chance to talk to Mitch Keller, but when he's back in Chicago potentially, I will try to grab him and ask about this location change and see what he thinks. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.